This is BBC World News. I'm Martine Croxall. Our top stories. Far fewer people are ending up in hospital with the Omicron variant, according to the latest British government data. But there's a warning too. Record numbers of infections could still lead to hospitals being overwhelmed. President Putin asked for an immediate response to his demand for NATO to stop expanding to the east.
We won't move 1 inch towards the east, they told us in the 1990s. And what happened? They deceived us. They brazenly tricked us.
And move over, Clint. There's an explosion of British talent starring in American Western films. But how do they prepare for the role and the accent? We'll hear from a dialect coach. Hello and welcome. We begin with major new analysis from the UK, which says people catching Omicron are 50 to 70% less likely to need hospital care compared with previous variants. That's the finding of a report from the UK Health Security Agency, which seems to back up data from South Africa and Denmark on the reduced severity of Omicron. As well as the reduction in hospital care, this latest report also claims people who are infected are up to 45% less likely to go to an emergency room in the first place. But there's a catch. Because the variant is so infectious, it could still lead to large numbers of people needing hospital treatment. And there are indications that a booster jab begins to lose effectiveness against Omicron after about 10 weeks. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Between 30 and 40. These are the ages of some of the people fighting for their lives on a COVID ward. Not one of them has been vaccinated against COVID-19.
A powerful illustration of the dangers facing the unvaccinated and the pressure on NHS staff, filmed in the intensive care unit of Royal Liverpool Hospital, where 4 out of 5 COVID patients are not jabbed.
The message is simple: get vaccinated.
I'm just going to take that blood sample, okay?
That's it, well done.
The Intensive Care Society said at least 2/3 of COVID patients were unvaccinated in 12 out of 16 critical care units it contacted in England.
It's not for us to judge people who haven't been vaccinated. It's for us to look after them as well as we can. But it's very sad when people come into hospital who haven't been vaccinated. They're very unwell and they ask to have the vaccine then, which of course they can't, because you have to get better from COVID before you can be vaccinated.
Evidence that Omicron causes milder disease has been reinforced by preliminary analysis from the UK Health Security Agency. It suggests that someone infected with Omicron is 30 to 45% less likely to attend A&E compared to a Delta patient, and between 50 and 70% less likely to be admitted to hospital. But the extra protection that the booster jab gives against infection does wane more rapidly against Omicron than Delta, being about 15 to 25% lower 10 weeks after the booster jab.
It shows that people with Omicron have a reduced risk of hospitalisation compared to Delta. Now, it's very early days. Only a small number of individuals, about 100, were admitted to hospital with Omicron in this period. But nonetheless, it is first signs of cautious optimism we can have for a while.
As daily cases hit another new record, UK researchers estimate that half of people with cold-like symptoms actually have coronavirus. The number of NHS staff off work because of COVID has risen by more than 50% in the past week in England to nearly 19,000. In London, the epicentre of the Omicron outbreak, it's more than doubled to nearly 4,000.
NHS workforce, it was already under pressure before Omicron came along. There's increased pressure there, as we're seeing in many workforces at the moment, especially if someone needs to isolate if they have a positive case. But some of the recent moves we've had from moving to 10-day to 7-day isolation, if you take tests in the last 2 days, I think all of this will help.
But the 10-day isolation rule is to remain in Wales. The Welsh Government said it wanted to put the brakes on Omicron as much as possible. Scotland and Northern Ireland are also keeping 10-day quarantine for now. Nightclubs in Scotland are to close for at least 3 weeks from the 27th of December, after fresh restrictions were put on large events and hospitality venues earlier this week. In Wales, nightclubs will close after Boxing Day, and no more than 6 people will be allowed to meet in pubs, cinemas and restaurants. No new measures have been announced for England, but the Prime Minister has said he can't rule out further restrictions after Christmas. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, the French health minister has said that France is expected to report around 88,000 new COVID cases on Thursday, the worst the country has seen since the pandemic began. Tighter restrictions against coronavirus have come into effect in several European countries amid concern over the spread of the Omicron variant. Aruna Iyengar reports.
Countries across Europe are responding in different ways to the rapidly spreading Omicron variant. Belgium, as it emerges from a 4th wave of COVID infections, is bracing for a 5th. Theatres and entertainment venues will have to close their doors on December the 26th, their busiest time of the year.
I absolutely agree that we should not take risks with public health. But with these measures, we threaten the mental health of a lot of people.
In Spain, the government of Pedro Sanchez has increased the vaccination rollout, extending this to children under the age of 12. Mask wearing will become compulsory outdoors for the 2nd time. And in the Netherlands, with shops, restaurants and cinemas closed, Dutch people and businesses face a very bleak Christmas. Rising cases mean hospitals have had to cancel other types of surgery.
There are now 600 at the ICUs, but it was at the cost of that we postponed the urgent surgeries for a lot of patients. And what we also did see in the last weeks is that the number of people that died in the total of the Netherlands was higher than expected.
Italy, the first Western country to be hit by the COVID-19 pandemic early last year, says Omicron infections now account for 28% of cases. But daily caseloads of coronavirus remain well below some other European countries, such as Britain and Germany. Aruna Iyengar, BBC News.
President Putin has rejected accusations that Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine after amassing thousands of troops on the border between the two countries. During his annual press conference, the Russian president said he wants to avoid conflict, but again insisted that the West must give Russia guarantees that NATO won't expand eastwards and admit Ukraine. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, if you happen to like long news conferences. Vladimir Putin's end-of-year press briefing is always a marathon affair. For 4 hours, the Kremlin leader fielded questions, and he used the event to vent his resentment at how NATO enlarged after the fall of the Soviet Union.
We won't move 1 inch towards the east, they told us in the 1990s. And what happened? They deceived us. They brazenly tricked us. There were 5 waves of NATO expansion, and now missile systems are appearing in Romania and Poland.
Is this Russia's response? A build-up of Russian troops near Ukraine's border. The Kremlin denies it plans to invade. But this is pressure, and on the West too, as Moscow demands an end to NATO enlargement and NATO military activity in Eastern Europe. What it calls security guarantees.
You must give us guarantees. You must do it immediately, now. We won't be palmed off with decades of idle chatter about the need of security for all, while the other side carries out its own plans.
Vladimir Putin spoke for a long time, but gave little away about his intentions regarding Ukraine. About whether, as the West fears, he's planning a large-scale military operation there. But what we do know now is that next month, US and Russian officials will sit down to discuss the security guarantees that Moscow is demanding. So there's still hope for a diplomatic resolution. Vladimir Putin has done 17 of these press conferences now as president. You need plenty of stamina to do this and to listen to it. And since all main TV channels in Russia show it live, it's wall-to-wall Putin. A reminder, as if Russians didn't know it, of who's in charge here. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
US President Joe Biden has signed into law a bill that requires all companies to prove that goods imported from China's Xinjiang region were not produced with forced labour. The bill, which passed Congress last week, also includes sanctions against individuals alleged to be responsible. Many big US companies such as Coca-Cola, Nike and Apple that will be affected have criticised the law, and some face making changes to their supply chains because of it. I got the details from our North America business correspondent, Samira Hussain.
The White House actually was initially not in support of this new law that was being worked out by Congress. But eventually, and pretty much late in the game, we heard from the White House that they were in fact going to support this rule. And it was something that Congress had really put together. It was something that they had pushed through, got it passed through the House and Senate with only one congressional leader actually not voting in favor for it. And what it really signifies is just the kind of pressure that the United States wants to put onto China. And the best way to do that, in their minds, of course, is to do so using some of these financial pressures. So by making sure that, multinational corporations, American multinational corporations, and that, corporations around the world are prevented from using any forced labor from that particular region, the United States is able to exert some power over China and its treatment of the Uyghur peoples.
What has the reaction been from Beijing?
Of course, Beijing has not been very pleased. It has said in a statement, look, they really want to be able to cooperate more with the United States when it comes to trade. But if you look at individual corporations, they're certainly being caught up in this. For example, the chip manufacturer Intel, well, they put out a statement earlier this week saying none of their suppliers are going to be able to use anything from that region in China. Well, that sparked a huge amount of backlash within China, with everything from hashtags to try and ban Intel products to forceful comments and rebukes from the Chinese government. Intel has had to walk back some of their comments by saying that, look, even though we're saying that you shouldn't use any of these suppliers, we're not actually putting any sort of political stance or offering a political stance. All we're trying to do is respect the new rules that are being put in place by the United States and, in fact, other pressures by other governments.
Samira Hussain in New York. Stay with us on BBC World News. Still to come. A statue commemorating the Tiananmen massacre has been removed from a university campus in Hong Kong.
The world of music's been paying tribute to George Michael, who's died from suspected heart failure at the age of 53. He sold well over 100 million albums in a career spanning more than 3 decades.
The United States troops have been trying to overthrow the dictatorship of General Manuel Noriega. The Pentagon said it's failed in its principal objective, to capture Noriega and take him to the United States to face drugs charges.
The hammer and sickle was hastily taken away. In its place, the Russian flag was hoisted over what is now no longer the Soviet Union, but the Commonwealth of Independent States.
Day broke slowly over Lockerbie, over the cockpit of Pan Am's Maid of the Seas, nose down in the soft earth. You could see what happens when a plane 8 stories high, a football pitch wide, falls from 30,000 feet.
Christmas has returned to Albania after a communist ban lasting more than 20 years. Thousands went to midnight mass in the town of Shkodra, where there were anti-communist riots 10 days ago.
This is BBC World News, the latest headlines. The latest British government data say far fewer people are ending up in hospital with the Omicron variant. People infected with Omicron are 50 to 70% less likely to need hospital treatment. Scientists have also warned that record numbers of infections could still lead to hospitals being overwhelmed. The US Food and Drug Administration has authorised another pill for treating people who are infected with COVID. The pill, developed by Merck, is taken within 5 days of the onset of symptoms. Tests suggest it reduces COVID hospitalisations and deaths by 30%, but it will only be offered to adults who fall into high-risk categories. It's the second such treatment to be authorised in the US in the last 2 days, after a similar pill made by Pfizer was approved on Wednesday. Eliav Bar is Senior Vice President of Global Medical and Scientific Affairs at Merck. He explained how the antiviral pills work.
Sure. So this is a medicine that interferes with the virus's ability to replicate itself. It resulted in significant reductions in hospitalizations and deaths, including a 90% reduction in deaths, which, as a physician, that's something I'm most concerned about, is obviously preventing people from dying from COVID-19. It's also a medicine that has been shown now in vitro to be effective against the Omicron virus.
Who was in your study? Because that will make a difference, won't it? How many of the people that you tried this on were vaccinated? How many of them had underlying health conditions?
Well, this was a study in people with underlying health conditions or people who are 60 and above. We excluded patients who were vaccinated, but as is the case in the United Kingdom, throughout the world, unvaccinated people are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 and especially the Omicron variant. So this was a particularly high-risk group of people. But I think we have now a medicine that can be used to very rapidly and easily reduce the risk of consequences of getting infected.
To what extent will pills like this then be a substitute rather than an additive to the vaccine programme?
No, they're complementary. It's really important for people to get vaccinated, and it's really terrific that people who either were vaccinated and still got infected or who haven't yet had a chance to be vaccinated now have an option of a medicine that can be used easily at home and can reduce one's risk of hospitalization or dying from COVID-19.
There's money to be made from drugs like this, with the pandemic still gripping many countries around the world. How much does a pill cost compared with a vaccine?
Well, it's very difficult to compare because, of course, the vaccine is there to prevent and is given to healthy people, whereas the pill is given to patients who are quite ill with COVID-19. The UK, as you know, it was the first to license molnupiravir, our medicine, and it's now being studied in the panoramic study to look at the effect of the drug in the UK. So the government will have a good idea of the value of the drug in the UK population.
Eliav Bar from Merck. A well-known statue commemorating the deaths of students protesting in Beijing's Tiananmen Square has been removed from a university campus in Hong Kong. It was one of the few remaining public memorials in the semi-autonomous region. Hong Kong's freedoms have been greatly eroded under a national security law imposed by Beijing. Russell Trott reports.
An iconic piece that stood tall in Hong Kong for decades. The Pillar of Shame commemorates the Tiananmen Square massacre, speaking volumes with bodies piled to represent the pro-democracy protesters killed by the Chinese authorities in 1989. It had been at the forefront of annual vigils, but it too has been silenced.
I don't think people would expect this thing will happen in the university, so-called, with the most freedom of expression or freedom of speech. And they try to become the first one to remove every history or parts of history inside the campus.
Under cover of darkness, construction workers dismantled the 8-metre statue. The University of Hong Kong ordered its removal in October, saying the decision was based on external legal advice and risk assessment in the best interest of the university.
I will ask, and if they don't give me the sculpture, I will sue them because they have destroyed artists' property in Hong Kong. They have kept it for 25 years, and now they destroy it. Of course, they must give it to me, even in pieces. So I want to take it back to Denmark and put it together and make an exhibition.
This pillar was one of the few remaining public memorials to Tiananmen Square in Hong Kong, where the anniversary was marked annually until being banned by the authorities in 2020. They cited COVID measures as the reason, but with China forbidding any public recognition of the massacre, questions have been raised over attempts to erase history in this semi-autonomous region. Russell Trott, BBC News.
You're watching BBC World News. Now, when you think of American cowboy films, you'll probably think of the likes of John Wayne or Clint Eastwood getting off their horse and telling surprised frontiers folk, you people need a new sheriff. But when it comes to the contemporary Western, there are new marshals in town, and howdy partner, they're British. UK actors are in demand in Hollywood, with Idris Elba gunslinging his way into a remake of The Harder They Fall. While Benedict Cumberbatch is already getting Oscar buzz for his performance as a cowboy in The Power of the Dog, which critics have been raving about. All amazing stuff. And heck, I thought I'd get in on the action. With more and more Brits taking roles requiring them to speak in a US accent, it's boom time for the industry's dialect coaches, who are teaching some of the world's hottest British talent to speak the American way. Dialect coach Lester Thomas Shane explains why.
Well, I think it's a question that producers like to hire actors that sell tickets. And the two that you cited are really, really good actors who are very popular in America, and they will sell tickets. So
it follows that's who they'd hire. But how do American actors feel about British actors riding their horses into their backyard, so to speak?
I think you'd probably have to ask more actors about it. Obviously, they would prefer to be hired themselves. I think there's always been a perception in the industry, a sort of inferiority complex about American actors doing dialect work, and I think that's an unfair reputation. Many American actors can do dialect work every bit as good as British actors who can do American accents. And you can certainly, I mean, Meryl Streep always comes to mind first. You've heard her do Thatcher and any number of British roles. So, but historically, I think there is a perception that British actors are trained in such a way that they can do accents better. And I would challenge that, but particularly because I teach.
Who Lester tends to find these things easier? If you have a musical ear, for example, does that tend to make you better at different accents and dialects?
I think it depends on each person. Some people who have a musical ear pick it up more quickly. Some people who know International Phonetic Alphabet can understand that transfer more easily. It depends on each actor, and the dialect coach's job is to figure out, to work with the actor on finding what's the entree into their articulatory system.
So where do you start then with a cowboy accent? Is there like a generic accent that everyone's aiming for?
Well, again, there's going to be a variety of cowboy accents depending on where in cowboy land this particular accent is happening, and period, right? So you mentioned in the intro about the old Norman Sheriff here kind of accent, which, you know, if you're doing a period Western, you probably want to aim towards that. Whereas I think the modern cowboy is going to probably sound closer to George W. Bush.
Help me then. If I wanted to say, you're short on ears and long on mouth, a famous John Wayne quote, where would I start? Help me out here.
So I think what you want to do is start by holding your jaw kind of a little bit tight, right? There's not a whole lot of movement here, so just hold your jaw in place. Bring back of your tongue, moving towards the back of your mouth, kind of let it
the back of your mouth.
Back there. Right, there you go. There you go. Right, so mouth becomes mouth.
Mouth. You're
right.
short on ears and long on mouth.
You're short, so you want to make sure you get that R in there.
That sounds New York to me. You're short. Say it again.
Not short, but get a hard R in there. Short.
You're short.
There you go.
You're short. You're short on ears. You're short on ears.
You're short on.
You're short on. You're short on
ears. Ears. Right. There's never an R that you're going to make too hard. Ears.
All those speech lessons were wasted on me. And long on mouth.
And long.
And long. And long on mouth. I feel like Dolly Parton. Mouth.
Well, no. Now you're not going Appalachian, right? If you want to do Dolly Parton, that's a whole other thing, right? Because she goes, right, that gets all kind of up there twangy, and this is down here
there twangy. Okay, well, I think I'm a work in progress. Lester Thomas, Shane, you'd have a lot of work to do with me. Thank you so much.
I think you'd get it in no time.
I did my best, and yes, the hat is coming home with me. The US writer Joan Didion has died at the age of 87. She was known in her heyday as a Hollywood socialite, screenwriter, essayist and novelist. In later life, she also became known for her writing on bereavement following the deaths of her husband and daughter within the space of 2 years. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have issued the first photograph of their daughter, Lilibet, on their festive card. The image was taken this summer at the couple's home in Santa Barbara in California. The card was sent by email through the Archwell charity that was co-founded by the Duke and Duchess in 2020.